maybe there's no audio because nobody's saying anything.
Yeah, maybe that's why. Now I can see my.
Right. Is the yes? There's audio now because
nobody dares.
Oh.
Did we lose our host? We're supposed to have a moderator.
I'm sorry?
Yes, there should be a moderator, it's true.
So guys, I can tell you that we are in stream. So Tanya, welcome. Please start the meeting.
Okay, I'm not seeing anybody, but I will start. Anyway, and yeah, welcome to the Documentary Film Festival, DOCU Days UA on Human Rights. And I'm happy that we have one window, but we are not. I'm really happy to see you or to listen to you because I'm not seeing you at all. This is today the first DOCU class. We are kind of premiere online DOCU class, online format. And yesterday the festival started online with the online opening and then Zooming party. So it will be also for me a big premiere to do this. The festival is running from 21st April to the 2nd May. I just wanted to say, and all the films are available until 10th of May. So you can see them online on docuspace.org. Before I start to ask you questions, I would like to present myself. I'm Tatiana Kononenko. I'm a filmmaker from Berlin, born in Ukraine, but I lived more than 20 years in Germany and now based between Berlin and Tbilisi and having quarantine in Tbilisi. And the essay for me, it's not only the theoretical passion, but also the practical one. I'm quite into the essay filmmaking, but every time when I'm saying this, I feel like on the other side, there are many interpretations of it, what it should be. So maybe my first question would be to all of you and why we are here together today is, can there can we have a definition of it, or is always kind of free interpretation? So I'm just giving the voice to you. I see Devika. Hello, nice to see you. So feel free to start because, yeah.
Oh, me? That seems like a weighty responsibility, but I mean, maybe I can follow up your question with, more questions. I've definitely been thinking about the question of like definition and actually trying to read up sort of different variations of answers historically and also, contemporaneously of what an essay film is. And I think, there's like kind of two poles that I find myself stuck between, and one of them being that, any attempt at definition seems sort of self-defeating, of different types of filmmaking, whether it's essayistic, whether it's some of the examples we were looking at were more memoiristic, whatever. They're so porous that to stake any boundaries seems to just like, invite like countering. But at the same time, I also worry about giving into the idea that sort of everything merges into each other, especially now. Like the question posed for this panel is why watch an essay film online? And in some of the initial discussions with Yulia, something that was brought up was when everything we see is image-based, how does that then impact us watching a specific form like an essay film or some other kind of image-based media? Like how do we render them as specific. And there is something scary about giving into the idea that, you know, everything is just like entertainment or content or just this mass of image-based stuff that we consume. So I'm sort of in between those and trying to like negotiate these ideas of allowing how imposing definitions is like kind of tyrannical and always excludes productive discussion to some extent. At the same time, there is something functional about it. And I'm curious if others have also been contending with that. And I think especially the essay film like brings up these questions so much, because even essay film is like the joining of two things that traditionally we think of it as two different media. Essay, something we think of as more literary or text-based, and then film, which is we think of as image-based. And so it forces us to challenge both those fields as well.
Yeah, could I jump in on this? I had some thoughts that I'd like to respond to that Devika brought up. You know, thinking about the question of why to watch essay films at home. I mean, obviously, right now, because of the COVID-19 problem, we have film festivals that are streaming their entire contents online. We just had the Images Festival in Toronto and Visages in Switzerland, and they're going completely online. And this prompted me to think about what it means when not just essay films, but films in general are going primarily online. And this is something digital, in the digital age, we've been kind of grappling with for quite some time, but now this problem is kind of accelerated by global circumstance. One of the things that I kind of thought about, I'd be interested to know what others thought about this, about the question of essay. I was thinking back to my salad days in academia, when I used to go to academic conferences, and you know, that's its own kind of cattle call, analogous in some ways, not in others, to the film festival circuit. But you know, one of the things that would happen in academic conferences is you go around and listen to a lot of papers, many of them very dense with a lot of academic jargon. And if you were really interested in something, you know, you could pick up maybe, well, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but you could pick up maybe like 30, 40, 50 at most % of someone's argument in that particular kind of oral setting. And then I would ask, and I think a lot of other people did this too, would ask the presenter for a copy of their paper. So you could read it and reread it at your leisure, so then you could really absorb their argument. And it occurred to me that maybe there's something analogous going on with the idea of an essay film being the difference between seeing it on screen, whether commercially or in a festival or whatever, and watching it streaming at home. I mean, some of the things that were part of the festival that you folks put together. You know, I've seen Sans Soleil numerous times, and I feel like I'm still grappling with it, still trying to understand certain things about it. Every single time I watch it, the Godard you programmed, the Sarajevo film is less than 10 minutes long, but I feel like you really need to watch it at least 5 times to even begin to scratch the surface of what Godard is really doing there, trying to accomplish there with words and with images. And I first saw that film in a festival circuit, and what that screening there really informed me was, well, this is something really fascinating. This is something really challenging. I'm going to have to see this again if I really want to grapple with it. So I think maybe, I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback in my ear. So I think one of the things that maybe the problem of watching essay films online or at home or what have you can avail us is that a certain kind of density, a certain kind of slipperiness of ideas that are presented in an unconventional way tends to invite and reward repeat viewings that the online situation can facilitate in a way that the strictly theatrical situation cannot. And of course, you need the theatrical situation as well. But I think having both of these things at our disposal can really help with the understanding of dense ideas. So there's just a thought.
Thank you very much. I would like to go to Christa with this question, because you were writing so much about essay, and in your early works you were describing essay as a try, as a Versuch, as an essay in a very literature way also of thinking, no? Taking from Montaigne. And do you think, like, since your book in 1991, I think it was, there were like changes on it, the form were changed? Can we like discuss a new way of thinking about essay, or, yeah?
It's a very good question, because yes, at the time, and I still think it's one of the ways to approach the essay form. I think there's no definition, but to think it as a kind of laboratory or possible form of the possible. But this is true for many forms, in video art, in experimental traditions. And I also thought what has changed since then. And looking at your program, that is a kind of statement. I was very struck by the fact that you put on the one hand Chris Marker and Agnès Varda, but let's say Chris Marker and Sans Soleil, Sunless, and on the other hand, Jonas Maker's Reminiscences from a Journey to Lithuania, which for me at the time, because we didn't only a conference, we also did 2 weeks of programming in the Stadtkino in Vienna at the time, and it was just before a program that made had been more known in the world, because it was curated by Peter Czerkaski, and it was called Found Footage. And we also had archival art films, I would say, or compilation films, but there was not a single film that was in our program, essayistic program, and that would have been at once in Peter Czerkaski's program. And we later worked together as curators. And at the time, documentary and avant-garde film practices were still somehow, there were still frontiers, and since then those forms merged. And when I wrote about a film that I really appreciate a lot by Nicolas Rey, a French filmmaker, Autrement la Mollussie, Molachia, I don't recall the English title. I thought that this was a kind of coming together of the Makers tradition and the Marker tradition. But I never would have said that Makers is an essay. And then I asked myself why, and I come back to the idea that somehow in the essay film we still have a specific form of negotiating with the voice and the relationship between text and image that is very specific in Makers as well, but in Makers it's more maybe a performance, whereas in Marker you have a form of correspondences. It's more Makers, it goes almost towards the narrative form, and is less in these open spaces. I mean, it's no, I would. It's very difficult to say why I would. I mean, of course, Maker's film has essayistic dimensions, but it belongs to a different tradition. And I would still think that the essay film is a form that has also to do with maybe with written textuality, and with and also with a kind of undermining traditional forms of narratives. This is why certain critics also come back to the form of third cinema, for instance. But this is only one way. It's not very clear, I guess. It's more maybe a way to reconsider the history of the avant-gardes as they were written. Maybe we have to reconsider them, and bringing them together.
Yeah, when I was doing the program, this was also my question: can I consider Mekas as an essayist? And I would say that lost, not. But reminiscences of my journey to Lithuania, maybe yes, and because they're kind of a approach to try to understand the space in between rethinking the image, which I found could be discussed as essayistic, but yeah, maybe not.
No, you're right. It's also, and it's a film that is in charge of memory. And although the first essayistic film, they tried to reconsider the power of cinema that can even reflect on its mnemonic charge. And Makers does it. You're right.
Kevin B. Lee, he is saying that actually essay, but this is also, we are like switching to essay and video essay. They're always the question, they're the cinema essay, they're the video essay, and they're like different. But Kevin, you are saying that it's like this kind of a film now even more important than before. And can you explain a little bit why you're coming to this point of view, or maybe, yeah?
Sure, my pleasure. I would bring in the context of what sort of happened over the last 15 years, where the phenomenon of online video and YouTube has just afforded a greater realm of personal expressivity through audiovisual media. So, you know, we've had millions and millions of videos being produced by people of varying backgrounds and relationships to cinema, the image, just being able to express themselves in this form. And it's worth noting that this form largely happened separately from the essay film tradition, as, you know, Christa and Michael and Devika have been describing. And what we've been seeing over the last 10 years or so is this coexistence and occasional convergence or confluence between this more sort of popular realm of essayistic, you know, and even that word is very problematic, right? But you know, when you look at YouTube videos, you know, you would not link most of what you see to Chris Marker or Jean-Luc Godard or Harun Farokhi, but it is an attempt by many people to express themselves and make sense of their experiences in the world and expound on different topics, by mobilizing audiovisual forms. And so one thing that fascinates me and that I'm continually trying to understand is this coexistence, how this coexistence could provide opportunities for cross-pollination, for commenting on each other. It definitely affords new opportunities for the essay film to exert its influence if there are opportunities to do so. And so this is the role of film curators, film programmers to consider spaces beyond what they're already familiar with. I think this is something that Michael was just considering, is that now there's this exposure. Now anybody in the world could log into this film festival and watch the films that are available. But then this creates new challenges for programmers to make their works available. I'll also say that this is also, it also creates this bandwidth issue, this question of, wow, there are millions of things to watch now that, and I think the COVID crisis has really, I don't know what your experience was like, but in the first week when I was sequestered at home, I received so many emails and announcements of film festivals and individual filmmakers offering their films for free. And suddenly experimental films I've been trying to watch for years, suddenly were available to me, but the deluge of it was a bit overwhelming. And it's kind of the complete sort of opposite take as, Michael was saying that, more than ever, we have a chance to take a film, a difficult film, and study it, to watch it, to really spend time with it as we never have before, because we're in this situation. And yet there are so many options for doing so. So this is a very specific kind of condition that I'm kind of dealing with now. And it's really brings into a new phase the question of what the essay film, how it works, how we engage with it, because it requires so much concentration, because it pushes our cognitive and experiential capacities beyond what most films can do. And yet to be engaging with that in this situation that we're in now, where, we're so subject to distraction, to this perpetual sense of crisis, so it's a very paradoxical situation that definitely requires us to think of new strategies for film viewership, and perhaps new strategies for film distribution and programming and filmmaking.
Now I'm on. I found that we're kind of an essayistic situation now. We are floating inside of the pictures and have to always all these images and all the sounds to combine them together, and also to find somehow the truth. I mean, I would say that I'm kind of a traditional person about the cinema, because I really love cinema as a space, and I ask myself a lot why I'm doing this. And for me, it's always important, I call it like, if you go to the cinema, like a black room, and you are not able, even if you don't like the film, or you like it, but you don't understand, but you're kind of sitting already, and to stand up, you have to go out, and there's all kind of, problems to leave the room. So you are forced to stay, to understand, but you're also forced, you have kind of a collective experience of a subjectivity. Because there's somebody near to you who is liking the film, and you can feel it, and you ask yourself, why him yes and me not? And so it's a kind of I don't know, maybe it's too naive to say, but it's kind of a democracy experience, like a lot of subjectivities in one room. And this is for me like really important. And but with this COVID, it's kind of a discussion coming up, and a lot of friends also in Berlin, which is running small cinemas, and all the discussion, like, in every art, this discussion of the end of the days. Do we arrive the end of the days in cinema? And like, I don't know. And is it a new possibility or not? And I'm still asking myself, is it the same to go to see, for example, Thomas Heiser film The Space, Heimat, the space in time, on a big screen, and like be fixed for 4 hours, and to have it at home with maybe to your partner, and know you can put the stop on it. It's kind of different physical experience, but maybe Bert can say, because Cargo was writing a lot about the death of the cinema in the last 10 years, or I'm wrong.
I think if we did, then we did it even to the same degree. We wrote about the resurgence of cinema and of cinemas and everything. But I think you just used a term that we had not used, like. Now I have these feedbacks for a second. I just continue. I don't know what's going on at the moment. The term that you used is subjectivity, and I think this is certainly a core notion for anything that to deal with the essayistic film, because this was one of the aspects that essayistic forms were always related to. And of course, it's very. I'm not sure. Do you hear me? Maybe you can. Yes. Thank you very much. Now the nod gave me a hint. Yeah. Of course, I think it is very different to conceive of subjectivity. For example, in the early 70s, when Godard was leaving Paris, going to Grenoble, and building a sort of new Montaigne situation for himself with his atelier, which refers to the production aspect of the essayistic film. This is also, I think, always very important. Essayistic films can, of course, to a certain degree, even be conceivable of being blockbusters of cinema in some way, but more, we would always associate them with films that are also, from the production aspect, have some relations to this, the simplicity of the act of writing, to the retreatedness, so to speak, of the act of thinking, and this atelier of Godard and Anne-Marie Miéville, this was a very core point. But it was very different to feel to conceive of herself or himself as a subject in 1973, when there was no internet yet, not to speak of a YouTube, which gives ample space to express myself, but within a superstructure, that is to a certain degree against the grain of like subjectivity per se, or of a heightened subjectivity, or an exploring subjectivity, what was always, of course, the thing about the essay and then the essay film. And I think it is almost difficult to come to terms with how much has happened actually just in those 50 years from 1970 to now, and now those were the heydays of a certain Western European tradition, or Western tradition of essayistic subjectivity, and now that has disseminated into so many ways. Let me just finish with a little idea about Thomas Heise, because I found it striking that I found this film in your program. Thomas Heise would for a long time not have been considered an essayistic filmmaker. He was, in a very proper sense, I think, a documentary filmmaker in the best sense, an observational and empathetic and an intellectual filmmaker as well. But he has, in the last 10 years, he has made something of a little shift where he has added a layer to his work with Material especially, which was a collage film and also an archival film. And now he adds another thing to this, to his oeuvre, which is magnificent in my, and also monumental in a certain way. An autobiographical film that doesn't speak very much about himself, save for the last half hour maybe, but of course it's completely about himself, but in the sense that the individual biography goes back way beyond the date of birth. You know, he becomes like a 120-year-old subject, or like the subjectivity of a century by objectifying himself into these images, or like projecting these images towards his own personal trajectory, and also the sounds of the letters and those documents. And in the end, it's very interesting for me that in the end, he basically gives he pleads for revolution, which brings him completely to the point where Godard with Le Livre d'Image is also at the moment, again, and after all these times, still.
Absolutely. I would also, when you were speaking, I was thinking of Material, that there was kind of a switch in his biography, film biography, I would say. And I found it interesting thing what you were saying. It was one of my questions, but I didn't know who will come to this or not. I'm jumping a little bit, but you pointed this Western subjectivity, because if we speak about the essay, it's like many times we mean French wave after Second World War, so we know important subjectivity to reflect on the history from really subjective point of view. And German New Wave was dealing with the same part of time, but from a little bit other side. And but I asked myself, because when I was thinking of essay and also thinking what kind of films I can take from, for example, from East European countries, and I realized that if I will take something from there, it can't be not taken by itself. It's neat explanation, because there was certain circumstances. So this essay cinema was, I think, a little bit different to the West European tradition, but I'm not a specialist in it, and so I think Alexander can say us a little bit about it. And I would be also interested by myself what is happening in India, for example. Is there like some tradition of it, or yeah, maybe Alexander, we can start with you, or I don't know. Yeah, we cannot hear you. No, really bad.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Take off the headphones. On the image. Maybe I can switch to Devika and you can, yeah. Devika, you're still with us.
Sorry, I was just muted for a second. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to. Well, I had a couple thoughts just listening to everyone speak, and you know, I was just thinking of this sort of installation film project I saw at Sundance this year called Black News by Khalil Joseph, and it was this 2-channel installation that riffs on the concept of news basically, and involves some originally, you know, some segments that were shot for this installation, which feature like pseudo newscasters, and the rest of it is just using found footage from the internet and from news and creating this collage set to music. And something he said when talking about the film after was that he actually had wanted it to be a real news show that he was pitching to TV studios, and he wanted to do reported segments all over the world, and he just didn't get funding because it was kind of too you know, avant-garde, or like kind of too experimental for television, like American television, and it was not like art, like proper artistic enough for other kinds of funders. So then he decided, you know what, all the images are already out there. People are constantly producing news. People are constantly self-reporting things, you know, with their own devices on the internet. So I'm going to use that to tell certain kinds of narratives just by putting those things together. So it's kind of a classic found footage or collage approach. But what was really interesting was that he framed this. He said, you know, I also realized like this is actually ecological filmmaking. He said, I think of this now as a way to make movies and tell stories, you know, without like contributing to the carbon footprint. Because if I had to go to all these places and actually shoot segments, then I would be flying there and taking crews and spending a lot of resources, and all these stories were already out there. So, I mean, it's kind of like putting a spin on something that he ultimately didn't have, seems like he didn't have a choice over. But it did make me think of, because Bert brought up the question of production, you know, and the kind of production practices or ideologies that have also given rise to essay films in certain parts of the world. And sometimes they have to do with resources too, right? It's a way to make movies, not to say that there aren't essay films that are elaborate productions, but it's a form that can be used for individual cinematic expression, even if you're lacking, you know, the host of resources needed to make a traditional film. And I think that's kind of an interesting idea, especially to, you know, connect to also what Kevin was saying about this becoming a form that's become so ubiquitous in the last 10 years in sort of this separate trend of just internet filmmaking. And that also, you know, that makes me think of, you know, what do we think of when we think of an essay? And I guess there is some higher degree of individuality maybe attached to it than film, which is always thought of as a collective production. You know, even the most auteuristic film tends to be the confluence of many people's labor and talent. Whereas when you think of writing an essay, you think of like this expression of a single person's subjective take or subjective view of something. And the essay film kind of comes closest to that. And a lot of ways in which that is expressed, I think, is through voice and text. And if you think of the Heise film, which I saw at the Berlinale, I mean, I can't think of encountering it for the first time not in a theater, even though, I mean, I hope people do. Like, I hope people watch it in whatever way they can. But so much of the film's appeal for me was hearing his voiceover and being enveloped by it. Because at the end of the day, it is... you know, I think Bazan said this about Chris Marker's films, that the primary material there is intelligence. Like it's primarily an intellectual film, and so I think there's some kind of intellectual discipline involved in watching these movies, and maybe that gets at what Michael was also talking about earlier. And to me, it is so important to be sort of enveloped in those conditions to be able to watch it in that disciplined way. You know, it asks more of us as viewers, as thinking viewers, than a traditional kind of film would. And so when you think of then watching it on the screen with the flatness of, you know, this laptop screen that becomes the container for everything, your YouTube videos, your TikTok stories, you know, everything, which all have different axes and idioms of attention and duration and distractedness and engagement and how much you bring to it. You know, you can kind of throw news into the picture too, which I think is kind of, news is kind of avant-garde, and especially if you watch like primetime or whatever you watch, like breaking news, there's these essayistic elements to it. And so I'm still kind of contending with how you allow for this porousness while still, you know, being able to switch between the different kinds of things that all of these different types of media ask of you. And I think essay films ask something very specific of you.
It's nice that you also bring up this production value, what Bernd also was saying, because it's just my personal statement. I'm dealing with the essay, you know, and also the way of working changed, because before doing documentary film or essay documentary, to get financed, you had not to write all your synopsis and so on. So now you have to write everything. But essay for me, it's also kind of research. So it's also the way what you're doing through the film, through the material, and a lot of things happening with montage, with the editing. And the second part is a poor cinema. I like very much this definition, poor cinema, and I hope I'm trying to do this, because all this production values I saw in Jihlava, for example, a lot of imitations for me for essays where you have a picture and you have the voice, and but the production value you can see there are like thousands of euros inside of it with all the travelings, and by the end this is kind of national propaganda. I'm preparing for some special film, but from Canada. And when you can see this is also like broadcasting TV from Quebec is involved in it. So, and like on the first sight, you think it's an essay, but if you see it, you cannot suppose it's this essay film, because there are nothing about thought, about like searching, about questioning. This is the reality in the and the second part, which I'm just thinking more and more, that for me cinema, it's also important, not just like a space as experience, but also as a political space, because it's so difficult for this kind of films. I don't know if Godin was Je vous salue Sarajevo would be nowadays, if he would be not Godard, with this film on some festival, on some cinematical space, or Salut les Cubains, for example, for Agnès Varda, if it would be done today. I don't know, because it's I consider this as a great film, but there are kind of a lot of things in between, which say this is film, this is cinema, if be, and also which say what kind of essay film. So when this film's coming to the cinema, it's kind of an act to occupy the space in between the other all kind of cinema, which is always think, my way of doing this is the cinema. It's kind of a, like more and more becoming definition what is the cinema and what is not cinema, or underground, or something minority. So yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in response to what you just said, because you asked about the Indian context, and one of the common forms of essay filmmaking that comes out of India and other post-colonial countries is like essay films that take archival material made by colonial footage that was made by the like colonial film production companies, and is trying to kind of reframe them. And so basically taking these images of themselves that were made through the Western gaze and trying to reframe them through different strategies of montage or critique. So that's also like another variant, I think, of essay films that kind of fit into what you're talking about, that mark themselves as not a kind, like their work is to mark themselves as not a kind of cinema, or to reclaim what film has meant to, how film has captured them, or kind of taking, or reframing the gaze through which a certain kind of cinematic production has arisen. So that tends to be like a really common genre of essay films, right? Archival essays, which we were talking about a little bit earlier too.
I think Alexander is with us. Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry for the problem. First of all, it's proud of me to be in such a brilliant company of researchers. Thank you for all of your ideas. In answering the questions, in my opinion, it was the traditional and the most well-known form of SF films, it is a combination of autonomous image and sound, as some of you told us before. In this combination, the image in this are often non-fictional, and the sound includes voiceover. And these films are usually based on author's personality and author's personal experience and impressions. Such a type of films can be found in documentary and experimental films, for example, from 60s, in works like of Chris Marker, Jonas Makers, Chantal Ackerman, all these names in your retrospective program. The forms of their films are often such as travelogues, diaries, or correspondence films. So as we can find, all these forms were borrowed from literature. The common feature for all these films was also a subjectivity and intimacy in narration. But of course, it's not the only strategy for SF films. It could, SF films could explore and use other strategy. For example, they could not use voiceover as, for instance, Heinz Emigolds or James Bennett could do in their films when they create just a catalog of images. Or, for example, another possible strategy could be a combination of fictional and non-fictional images, as Wally Export or Laura Mulvey did in their films, which I also can refer to as the films. One more example of SF films diversity is using of found footage, as also you said before, archival materials or images from internet, as Jean-Luc Godard did. Answering the second question about Eastern Europe context, I need to say that it's a very interesting topic for me personally, because SF films give us also this opportunity to revision and rediscover a film history with video essays or with some papers. So from my side, it's very interesting to compare European American SF films with the similar films which were produced in Soviet Ukraine by, for example, Felix Sobolev and his students from the Kyiv School of Science Cinema. We made with Dovzhenko Center, where I work, we made a big retrospective program last year in Iglava Film Festival of Felix Sobolev, but it was just the first step, I think, to share his films outside the Ukraine. Of course, we should be very careful talking about Sobolev as a film director, because he worked at one of the most marginal and autonomous studios in USSR, but he wasn't such an independent author as Chris Marker was or Chantal Ackerman. And his topics were not so personal and intimate as the topics of European or USA authors. He talked about scientific experiments, about science hypotheses in cinema, but created it in very unique style of cinema. So aesthetically, we may refer his films to essay films, in my opinion, but it is interesting for me and for future researchers, I think, to compare his position and his situation, his context, this context in West Europe, in the first world, as we say.
I'm very sorry. I'm getting from the technical department the image, the message that we have to be in 5 minutes to finish our conversation, because they like have next streaming, and this is so pity, because I have the feeling that we just started actually to speak about all of this, and it's wonderful discussion. I don't know, I would like just to, if you want to say something, like Michael was just saying in the beginning, and then this is the problem on all this online thing. We cannot discuss as a French, you know, and interrupting each other, and yeah, feel free to say something thank you very much all. It's amazing for me too. I was really excited and really nervous, but yeah.
I don't know whether Michael wants to speak, because if not, I have also some remarks.
Yes, please, Christa.
Go ahead.
So responding to Alexandra, I think there are two interesting arguments that that we could go on to discuss regarding your programming. It's the gap between the sound and the image that we find in Heise, but also in Elfi Mikesh, for instance, and also a kind of new definition or of merge at the time between documentary and fiction. That was also some of the definitions of SF film at the time, or this kind of hybrid forms that Elfi Mikesh, who comes from photography either, is working like other artists do, or that you can even have with makers. And from this point of view, I would just say that Jem Cohen's film is not so essayistic. We know him as a wonderful experimental filmmaker, but he just puts his voice back somehow and gives an homage to Jonas Makers. And there's a much more radical film dealing with Makers' form, which is Douglas Gordon's I Had Nowhere to Go, that was programmed in the context of the last documenta, where you hear Makers, not from his films, but reading his autobiographical texts. But as you know his voice from the films, you have the images of Makers, and they are just popping up, and yeah. So yeah, this would be maybe the radicality of the deconnection between sound and image would be an argument for me.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm totally agreeing. I'm also thinking that the Cohen's film is not essayistic at all. It's more a little portrait of Makers.
Right.
But yeah, thank you very much for the Gordon film. Yeah, absolutely. But it's nice. It's interesting to discuss. It's always the image and the sound together makes this form automatically essayistic. You are totally right. This is like which a lot of people, or which is like a common definition. If you put the voice and the picture together, you have but not. So, yeah.
And could I maybe just say something really fast? Oh, hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. The question of Mikas's inclusion, which I think is really correct, it doesn't raise these kind of interesting questions of genre, and I think that we typically think of Mikas as being part of this sort of subgenre of diary film. And what's interesting about thinking diary film alongside essay film is that it's not just about subjectivity, and it's not just about sound image, but it's about the idea of creating a persona. Because I've been studying diary film, teaching a course on diary film recently, and when you look at Mikas's work against other, or for that matter, Chris Marker, against other diary filmmakers, like say, I don't know how many people know Anne Charlotte Robertson's diary work, but there's this kind of rawness to that work where it's so clear that she's, part of the context of that work is that she's dealing with mental illness, and there's no creation of a persona, right? That it's really this kind of direct transcription of her life and her struggles. And so you get this sense that, well, there's this question of subjectivity, there's this question of ironic distance, of processing the image, processing the voice, and someone, I think it was Barrett, who talked about Heise and the distance, kind of using his life and his history as kind of concrete material. So I think that it raises these kind of fascinating genre questions that we'd have to kind of map out, almost like that, if many of you have seen it online, that crazy Paul Schrader target diagram thing that he made about art cinema, with the Tarkovsky ring and all that. That we would have to kind of chart all of this on some sort of massive piece of paper to kind of plot where everybody belongs. But there is this question about essay film as having certain kinds of parameters that link with other kinds of genres, documentary, diary film, but somehow it's like this kind of, we know it when we see it question, and we know that some things don't seem to quite follow into the essay film, and maybe the more we research it, we'll kind of figure out what those things are. But I think part of it really has to do with this question of maybe persona. Oh, first cat of the chat. There you go. It has to do with creating a persona and treating one's own self as semi-objective material, or creating a subject rather than kind of automatic or direct transcription of the self. But again, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good last word. I don't know.
Can I add a very short last word?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say to Alexander, I very much hope that Dovzhenko Center will get, even after this crisis, ample enough funding so that we can see all your great research with English subtitles at some point, because it would be very interesting for us. It would very much widen our perspective on everything.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I have really to finish our wonderful conversation. I'm so sorry, but thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you very much for being with us. And yeah, I hope we can see each other once in offline format and discuss more. And stay healthy, everybody. And I want just to say that the next, for all people who are watching us now, at 8 o'clock, there will be tete-a-tete with the director Irina Cilik on a new film, The Earth is a Blue is an Orange, and on DOCU Days UA. So, and her film will be also open from today for 24 hours. Yeah, I have to finish now. Thank you. And
ciao.
Healthy, everybody.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.